She was never meant to be chosen, never meant to be loved, and yet, she became the one he could not walk away from. Because sometimes, the quietest hearts are the ones that dare everything. It begins in silence, the kind that settles deep within a person, unnoticed by the world. Mary Bennet had always lived in that silence. Not because she had nothing to say, but because no one ever truly listened. In rooms filled with laughter and admiration, she was the afterthought, the one who stood just outside the light, watching others be chosen while she learned to accept being overlooked. She told herself it did not matter, that affection was a luxury, not a necessity, that a sensible mind and a composed heart were enough to build a life upon. And for a long time, she believed it. She shaped herself into what the world seemed to require: measured, thoughtful, restrained. Where others spoke with charm, she spoke with reason. Where others followed their hearts, she followed what made sense. It was safer that way. Safer to never hope too much, to never reach for something that might slip through her fingers. Because hope, she had learned, could be a dangerous thing. It could make you forget your place. It could make you believe you were worthy of something more. But even the most careful hearts are not immune to longing. There were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, when she wondered what it might feel like to be seen. Not politely acknowledged, not tolerated, but truly seen. To have someone look at her and not search for someone else. To be chosen, not by accident, but with intention. She buried those thoughts quickly, as she always did. Dreams like that had no place in reality, not for her. And then, he arrived. Tom Hayward was not the kind of man who demanded attention, yet it followed him all the same. There was something unassuming in the way he carried himself, something steady and grounded, as though he did not feel the need to prove his worth to anyone. He observed more than he spoke, listened more than he judged, and in a world that had always spoken over Mary, that alone was enough to unsettle her. Their first conversations were careful, almost hesitant, words chosen with precision, as though both feared saying too much. She expected him to lose interest quickly, as others always had, expected him to turn his attention elsewhere, to someone brighter, someone easier to admire. But he didn't. He stayed. Not out of obligation, not out of politeness, but because he wanted to. And that was new, unfamiliar, dangerous. He asked her questions no one had ever thought to ask. Not about trivial things, but about her thoughts, her opinions, the way she saw the world. At first, she answered cautiously, unsure of what he truly wanted to hear, but he never corrected her, never dismissed her. Instead, he listened, as though every word she spoke held value. As though she held value. It unsettled her more than indifference ever had, because it is one thing to accept being invisible, and another to suddenly be seen. With every conversation, something within her began to shift. The certainty she had built her life upon, the belief that she was meant for solitude, for quiet observation rather than participation, began to fracture. She found herself waiting for his presence, anticipating the sound of his voice. Hope is a fragile thing, but once it awakens, it refuses to be silenced. Mary tried to return to who she had been before. Quiet, composed, untouched by expectation. She reminded herself that nothing had been promised. Nothing had been spoken aloud. And yet, everything felt different. The same rooms no longer felt the same. The same conversations carried a weight they never had before. Because now, she was aware of him, of his presence, of the way her thoughts seemed to follow him long after he had gone. And what frightened her most was how easily he had become a part of her world. Tom did not force himself into her life. He did not overwhelm her with grand gestures or bold declarations. Instead, he remained steady, constant in a way she had never known. He met her where she was, never asking her to be louder, brighter, or different than she was. And in doing so, he gave her something she had never allowed herself to want: comfort. It was in the quiet exchanges, the shared glances, the unspoken understanding that passed between them. In a world that often felt too loud, too demanding, he became a place where she could simply exist. No expectations, no performance, just peace. But peace can be deceiving, because beneath it, something deeper was forming, something neither of them could fully name, yet both could feel. It lingered in the pauses between words, in the way their conversations stretched longer than necessary, as though neither wished for them to end. It was subtle, but undeniable, and still nothing was said. Mary told herself that was for the best, that silence was safer than certainty, because certainty could shatter, certainty could disappoint. As long as nothing was spoken, nothing could truly be lost. But her heart was no longer as obedient as it once had been. She began to notice the smallest things, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way his attention never wandered when she was near, the way he seemed to understand her silences just as much as her words. And with each passing moment, her carefully constructed distance began to crumble. It was no longer just comfort. It was attachment. And attachment was dangerous, because it meant there was something to lose. There were moments when doubt crept in, quiet but persistent. She questioned everything: his intentions, her own feelings, the reality she found herself caught within. Perhaps she had imagined it all. Perhaps she had mistaken kindness for something more. It would not be the first time the world had reminded her of her place. And yet, there were moments that felt too real to dismiss. Moments where the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, where words were unnecessary, where understanding passed effortlessly between them. Moments that whispered of something deeper, something neither of them dared to name. But the world does not allow such moments to exist without interference. It began subtly, a glance from someone else, a passing comment, the kind of remarks that seem insignificant on the surface, yet carry enough weight to plant doubt. Reminders of reality, of expectation, of what is considered suitable and what is not. Mary felt it immediately, that familiar pressure to retreat, to return to the safety of distance, to remind herself that she had been content before, that she did not need this complication, this uncertainty. It would be easier to let it go now, before it became something she could not control. But letting go was no longer simple, because for the first time, she was not the only one at risk. There were moments when she caught something in Tom's expression, something unguarded, something that mirrored the uncertainty she felt within herself, as though he too stood at the edge of something he could not fully understand, as though he too was waiting for something to change. Silence can only hold so much before it begins to break under the weight of what is left unsaid, and theirs was beginning to fracture. It did not happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything changed. Instead, it was a slow unraveling, quiet, almost unnoticeable at first. A shift in tone, a hesitation where there had once been ease. The kind of distance that does not announce itself, but is felt in every word that is no longer spoken. Mary sensed it before she understood it. Where once there had been certainty in his presence, there was now something uncertain, something guarded. Tom still listened, still spoke with care, but something beneath it had changed. As though he were holding something back, as though he had stepped behind a wall she could no longer reach. And for the first time since he had entered her life, she felt the familiar sting of being left behind. She told herself she was imagining it, that nothing had truly changed, that she was allowing her own fears to distort what had always been simple. But doubt, once awakened, does not easily retreat. It lingers. It questions. It turns even the smallest difference into something impossible to ignore. And soon, she could not ignore it at all. There were whispers, subtle at first, then harder to dismiss. Conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Glances exchanged between others that carried meaning she was not meant to understand. The world, it seemed, had begun to notice what she and Tom had tried so carefully to leave undefined. And the world had its own opinions. It spoke of suitability, of expectations, of what made sense and what did not. It reminded her in quiet but persistent ways of the role she had always occupied, the one who observes, not the one who is chosen, the one who accepts, not the one who dares to want. And slowly, those voices began to echo louder than her own. She withdrew without meaning to. A step back here, a silence there. Where she had once allowed herself to lean into the comfort of his presence, she now held herself apart. Careful, controlled, as she had always been before. But something about it felt different now. Because this time, it hurt. Tom noticed. Of course he did. He was not a man who overlooked what mattered. And Mary, whether she believed it or not, had come to matter more than he had ever intended. He saw the distance in her, the way her words became fewer, the way her eyes no longer met his as they once had. And though he did not immediately understand the cause, he felt the loss of it all the same. And yet, he too hesitated, because he was not untouched by doubt. What had begun so naturally, so unexpectedly, had grown into something neither of them had prepared for. And with that growth came questions he could no longer ignore. Questions of timing, of expectation, of whether what existed between them could truly withstand the world beyond their quiet conversations. He had not meant for it to become this, had not meant for her to become someone he thought of in her absence, someone whose silence unsettled him more than it should. And yet she had, without effort, without demand. And now, he did not know what to do with it. So he did what many do when faced with something uncertain. He stepped back. Not entirely. Not enough to sever the connection, but enough to create space. Enough to protect himself from what he could not yet define. And in doing so, he created the very distance he feared, because distance does not protect something fragile. It weakens it. Mary felt it fully now, the shift that could no longer be denied. What had once felt like something quietly growing between them now felt like something slipping away. And she did not know how to stop it, or if she even had the right to try, because nothing had ever been promised. No words had been spoken, no assurances given. Everything she had begun to believe had existed only in the spaces between their conversations, in the meaning she had found in his presence, in the hope she had never meant to hold onto. And hope can be a cruel thing when it has nowhere to land. There came a moment, small, almost insignificant to anyone else, when it all became too much. A conversation cut. Letting go should have brought peace, but instead, it left behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Mary returned to the life she understood, the one built on reason, restraint, and quiet acceptance. She spoke when spoken to, smiled when expected, and carried herself with the same composed certainty the world had always known. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. But within her, everything had. Because once a heart has learned what it is to feel, it cannot simply forget. She told herself she had done the right thing, that distance was necessary, that whatever had existed between her and Tom had never truly been hers to hold on to. It had been a moment, nothing more. A fragile illusion she had mistaken for something lasting. And yet, it did not feel like an illusion. It felt like something unfinished. Days passed, then longer still. And with each passing moment, the absence of him became more present than his presence had ever been. It was in the spaces where his voice should have been, in the quiet pauses where conversation once flowed effortlessly. It was in the way she found herself thinking of things she would have said to him, had things been different, had she been different. But regret is a subtle thing. It does not arrive loudly. It settles slowly, quietly weaving itself into thoughts you try not to entertain. It asks questions you cannot easily answer. What if you were wrong? What if you let go too soon? What if it had meant something after all? Mary pushed those thoughts away, just as she always had. She would not allow herself to be ruled by uncertainty. She had spent too long building a life uncertainty to abandon it now for something so fragile. But somewhere deep within her, a part of her had not let go at all. And she was not the only one. Tom felt it too. The absence, the distance, the quiet emptiness that had taken the place of something he had once not fully understood. He had convinced himself it was for the best, that stepping back had been the sensible choice, that whatever had been forming between them had been uncertain, perhaps even impractical. But clarity, he realized too late, does not come from distance. It comes from loss. Because now that she was no longer within reach, he understood exactly what he had been about to lose. It was never just conversation, never just companionship. It had been something steady, something real, something that had asked nothing of him except honesty. And instead of meeting it with courage, he had hesitated. And in that hesitation, he had pushed her away. There are moments in life when we are given a choice to remain safe within what we know, or to step forward into something uncertain. Tom had chosen safety, and now he was left with the cost of it. He began to notice everything he had once overlooked, the way her presence had brought a quiet balance to his world, the way her thoughts had challenged him, steadied him, understood him without demand, the way she had seen him, not for what he presented, but for who he truly was. And more than anything, the way she had trusted him, a trust he had not known how to hold. It was not a sudden realization, but a gradual certainty that settled within him with undeniable force. What he felt for her had never been confusion. It had never been uncertainty. It had been fear. Fear of choosing something real,